is a much more minimal crowd, so I'm feeling a little more confident. So I am here largely because I'm not a natural or comfortable public speaker. And so when I was asked to come out and speak to the Sycamore community, initially I thought absolutely not. But then I realized, these I have to practice what I preach, and I really believe that the things that I've done so far in my life and career that make me pretty uncomfortable, I really get a lot more out of. So that's why I'm here, selfishly. So I'll start with sculpture, which is the thing that I decided, sculpture specifically, ceramic sculpture, the thing that I decided I was infatuated with and really the only thing I wanted to pursue when I was a child at Sycamore. And luckily, with the support of people like Mrs. Prince and my parents, I was given those opportunities. And I really focused on craft and ceramic sculpture. And it gave me actually a great inroad to a pretty positive educational experience. I went to college for sculpture, and by the time I finished my degree in undergrad, I had opportunities to intern at GM, doing concept car modeling, working for public artists in California, and exploring my own sort of very internal and isolating practice, and I loved it. It was something that became something that was really natural and kind of easy for me. And so I felt that I should probably challenge myself, unfortunately, to try something different. So I thought, I have somewhat of a command for sculpture. Architecture is probably just a way to make bigger sculptures. So I decided to go kind of study this thing that I perceived as just a progression of what I already knew. And what I realized pretty quickly was that architecture really wasn't about form or object. It wasn't something that was solitary, something that you did behind closed doors, handed down, and then disappeared from. It was something that, if done in its most strongest form, it would function not only to serve people, but also to bring communities together and create sort of an end user who was also a stakeholder from the beginning. So the first project that I had the opportunity to work on that taught me this sort of power of architecture was in Rwanda. And it was post-genocide, so this was a community, an entire nation that had seen atrocities that I could never imagine. And there were women and children, especially in rural communities, who were being stretched beyond their comfort zone in ways that are unfathomable in terms of having to go from hiding in the bush for survival purposes to being heads of households and learning how to create economic opportunities for themselves. Inadequate infrastructure and lack of educational resources and virtually no connection to the outside world created a really intense dynamic. And I felt very presumptuous when I was given the opportunity to work on a project in rural Rwanda for a women's opportunity center. This would be a place where women could learn entrepreneurship, farming, practices, craft making, as well as seek counseling and community resources. And it was a scary process to get involved with because projects like this take years and usually don't ever come to fruition. But this one did. And I think the thing that I am most proud of about this project is that we, as a team, worked largely from New York, but really challenged ourselves to put ourselves into, as best we could, into the community and into the shoes of people who were going to be using this center, and people who would be affected by it. There's a saying, change one woman's life and you change the world. And that was really Women for Women's their sort of take on investing in communities like this. And Women for Women International is a great organization that actually was the client, in a sense, that we collaborated with to create this in other centers. And we were really focusing on trying to understand all these power dynamics and lack of materials for building, and trying to understand how do you build something when there's virtually no local materials being produced that are high quality. And so, we decided that with the help of the community would be probably the only way to succeed. So never having set foot on Africa, let alone Rwanda, we worked for over 2 years from New York and from other offices with consultants all around the world, and also worked really closely with our local partners in Rwanda to formulate a way that we could possibly create a successful outcome for this project. So finally, after 2 years of working in a project team based in a small studio in New York, I had the opportunity to go to Rwanda for the first time and see where we'd gotten. And so the organization that I mentioned, Women for Women, had already been participating and sort of aiding in the construction of job training programs, trying to teach women new skill sets that were marketable and desirable. So we actually found kind of an opportunity in the lack of building materials where we could collaboratively set up a brick-making cooperative with the women that were already going to be the beneficiaries of this building, and they would actually be producing the bricks, ideally, that we would use to build the site. So this is a video of sort of as the cooperative started making bricks one by hand, clay dug from the site. So, kind of making nothing or something out of nothing, and also really being stakeholders in the creation of their own future. So this is an image from shortly after the opening of the center. And the thing that I really take away from this is there's a very demure personality trait that comes out in buildings like this, or buildings that I had seen that were similar formally, maybe not exactly formally, but large buildings that had been brought in basically and set down in a rural community. The difference here was that no one was afraid to use it. No one felt that they were not an owner of this because they built it. And so this was something that I noted and really was excited by. And this project was about working with people to make a building rather than working for them. I knew that I wouldn't just walk away from this project and sort of begin something new somewhere else, because this fundamentally influenced the way I thought about building and making of physical objects in this world in general. So a friend of mine from grad school and I decided to work with friends and colleagues we'd met and made in Rwanda to find ways to engage local communities further. So we decided one of the things that we did was pulling some artists that we knew that lived and worked in an artist cooperative in the capital city of Kigali and asking them to come out to rural communities that we'd engaged with in the process of building the Women's Opportunity Center, and asked them to start doing some arts and crafts workshops with kids in these rural communities. The idea was that, like the brick making process, if you can take literally mud and turn it into something so positive and strong, you can really change your own destiny. And you could see how you can actually take your creative output and find creative ways or creative exits for problems in your life. So this was a totally new type of project for us because really we wanted something immediate. We wanted to create relationships between people who, as we saw urbanization and the city of Kigali becoming more and more developed, when you would go to the rural communities, literally nothing had changed. This was a way to facilitate connections between people. So obviously this was an uncomfortable and scary thing to do, because really we just kind of put two groups of people in the same place with an idea, and you know, the outcome of these workshops is different than the outcome of an architectural project. The process is fast, messy, collaborative, and cheaper. But the thoughts that are shared visually between people who participated, they were really beautiful and deep and profound, and the sense of pride and the way that people lit up through this process was really exciting to see. So, you know, I came out of that phase of work really believing that projects come in all different sizes and shapes. There's different objectives, different scales, and different outcomes. And so many times, although I came into architecture thinking that it was about just making big sculptures, I realized that really the sculptural element is probably the least important to me, and the opportunities and interactions around building and designing and the process therein are really more meaningful things to focus on. And so with this understanding of architecture as a verb rather than a noun, I've now begun, just in the past year or so, to redevelop old buildings on the south side of Chicago. You know, on the news, these neighborhoods are described nationally and internationally as almost exclusively described by gun and gang violence. And I always, you know, I was curious about what the nature of these places really was, and if there was a way that architecture and building projects could somehow create inroads or some sort of positive change. So I wanted to understand the dynamics before I began, but instead I just jumped in. And so I did very little research except going a few times with my partners and driving around, and we stopped and saw some buildings that were crumbling to the ground that were just really nice quality buildings that just needed some vision. So we've started to take these buildings and try to not only reconstruct them, but think of how we can create positive, high quality residential units for a lower income market that already exists in the area and is deeply in need of quality building, and also try and think about how we can learn from this toxic legacy of power and unempowered people in a community where segregation has really enabled people to create a negative public perception and walk away. So, you know, one of the things that I've had to do now is learn about building management with no training in that, and try and make positive decisions even when we're sort of addressing a long and deep history of landlord-tenant dynamics that are, I think, plague most lower-income communities. So as an outsider trying to build local teams, I still live in New York, and establish healthy relationships with people living in the completed buildings. The challenge is in the non-physical parts of the work, once again. So this is not just about beautifying buildings, but also about trying to understand how architecture and building can be an agent for change. So when the building process and rebuilding process and decision-making processes around these Chicago buildings are intimidating to me, I try and focus back on the goal of getting to a scale where we are able to develop job training programs around the construction process, around project management, and around building maintenance for teenagers and young adults in the neighborhoods we're rebuilding in. So armed with the experiences I have from working with end users in Rwanda and other communities, I deeply understand that architecture has an intangible power to connect people across worlds. But every world is different and every community is different, and I'm lucky enough to have found local partners who share this vision with me, and I do believe that we will get there. We aren't there yet, but what we are doing in the meantime is trying to create stable homes that are well designed, well built, and where there's a relationship of mutual respect, so that we can build on that foundation to establish the training programs. So I left the students earlier just with the sort of takeaway that we start making decisions about how we perceive other communities really early on in our lives. And it's up to us to decide if we are comfortable with just taking what the media or others portray communities to be about, or if we really can challenge ourselves to create our own firsthand experiences and our openness to view them as just other people who are in other situations that are different than ours. Thanks.